Right, so ITC, the paper-to-hotel multi-business conglomerate, has now decided to venture into the perishable segment. And to talk to us more about that is none other than SIVAKUMAR himself. But that is not the only subject of discussion. The buzzword this week, of course, has been the GST as well. We'll come to the perishable segment and the road forward and the challenges that await you. There will be quite a few, I imagine. But first, speaking about GST, that has been the buzzword. Just a sense that you've been getting. We've seen two GST council meetings in terms of rate fixation. There have been strong positive comments coming in from state finance ministers as well as from the union finance minister. Just the sense that you're getting looking at the space in which you operate, the impact that you're expecting, that you're anticipating as far as the processed food industry is concerned.
I think firstly on the GST itself, I think certainly it is no doubt a transformative initiative, because for long we have been vying for India as one unified market. And to that degree, I think it's a very significant step forward. And then within that, obviously, there are multiple sectors which are looking at this and saying, yeah, our rate maybe should have been on a lower slab and somebody else should have been a little different, or it should have been broken into multiple things. Like that, I'm sure from a processed food, also there's a perspective. You know, processed food has conventionally been taxed as a rich man's food in India. But it should be seen as in the context of doubling farmers' income. How can processed food help raising farmers' income? If that perspective was used and the tax was a wee bit lower, some are at 12, some are at 18. Ideally, they should have been at 5 and 12, because in any case, on the basic raw material, it's all been zero rated. So to that degree, that part is fine. But in the processed, to some part of it, within the larger transformative initiative, I think this is a missed opportunity, I would say. That if process was kept low, as it is, there is packaging cost and a distribution cost, because consumer looking to buy that should not have added tax as one more reason to stay away from that. I mean, how does a farmer's produce get value added and bring more income back to the farmer? Right. I think that perspective is also important.
Right. So that is one space that you believe we perhaps might have missed the bus. But again, looking at the wide portfolio of products in question, biscuits, that was one key aspect. It's seeing an 18% levy as far as that slab is concerned, which again had prompted some concerns about perhaps if that was wee bit on the slightly higher side. Just your perspective on that, sir.
Yeah, I mean, at one level, if you look at a principle of saying let for the whole category be one rate, it makes sense. And having said that, like every other industry, that industry also would look, instead of 18, could you have been kept at 12? But yes, there are biscuits at various price points, some at lower, some at higher, and therefore that kind of an expectation is always there. But I think in principle to have kept it at one rate, although the expectation would always be from an industry perspective to keep one notch lower, I think this is fine.
Sir, since we are speaking of ITC, I cannot help but mention, of course, cigarettes. They've been put at the highest slab possible, which is 28%. There are, however, concerns about the computation of the cess, etc., that has been slapped over and above the GST. Is that a concern, one, in terms of computation, and is it a concern also in terms of the current tax incidence rate as opposed to the one proposed by the GST?
No, at this point of time, going by all the media reports before you finally see anything, it is assumed that it is revenue neutral. I think from a transition, it's appropriate, as it is with high taxation over the recent past. For every 5 cigarettes, 1 cigarette has been already illicit. Now, if you do anything with these rates, obviously it would only get worse. So I think if for nothing else but for ensuring that there is a revenue neutral rate, I think it will be positive for the legal cigarette industry and from a revenue collection perspective.
Fair enough. Those, of course, sir, were the individual products that we were thinking of. But also speaking of, you mentioned we perhaps might have missed the opportunity in terms of processed foods. Biscuits, you mentioned slightly on the higher side. The one interesting comment that, in fact, we got very recently from the Karnataka finance minister was that companies, especially food companies, needn't really worry, given that they have long supply chains and that they will be able to benefit from input tax credits. That is the assurance coming in, at least in theory, from the government, from various finance ministers. Are you confident of that in terms of perhaps the pricing perhaps not being a problem, given the opportunity that lies by way of the input tax credits?
Yeah, I think much of this has to be really studied in terms of what all items get input tax credit, how much will it really get adjusted, and all of that. But I'm saying the perspective typically from an industry would be that it could have been a little lower. But I think in the larger transformative agenda, I think one needs to stride past this and move ahead. Because as it is, we got several rates, more than many other countries. Of course, for a country like India with various levels of income, different kind of products, some of these may have been inevitable in terms of multiple rates which are there. But I think by and large, I think one should see that as input tax credit get adjusted, and at a broader revenue level, this is neutral from the revenue collection point of view, and therefore doesn't really become inflationary from a consumer perspective. So I think when that happens, industry getting adjusted in a wide range of portfolio of products is just a question of time.
It's interesting that you mentioned about the possibility of perhaps an impetus being given as far as the inflationary aspect is concerned. That is something that has been a cause of concern. The government has, of course, pointed out on various occasions that they are hoping to keep the rates at a level which does not prompt the inflation to go higher. Broadly speaking, we've seen a lot of comments coming in from North Block, from the Finance Ministry, about the rates that have been fixed. Just your sense, broadly speaking, given the rates that you are seeing, given, of course, the efforts, as you pointed out, are being made to make it revenue neutral. But broadly speaking, do you look at it, are you looking at GST, that it could perhaps prompt some concerns with respect to inflation?
Unlikely as it appears. I think a fair amount of exercise happened, bringing different stakeholders in place from across different states, producing states and consuming states, and so on, with a number of items at 0 and 5 and 12. And we have seen the broader percentage spoken about so far as to how much has fallen below and above. From that perspective, it is unlikely. But I think fine print still will have to come on the final rates. When they come, one has to really calculate before one sees a final view. But I think so far, it appears fine.
Fair enough. The one final question on GST, however, sir. 1st July, a very ambitious target is what the government had. They've managed to push through and manage to get a fair bit of consensus, given the wide interest as far as various states are concerned. So that is the one direction that the government appears to be pushing towards. They're confident of that. India Inc. Is India Inc. confident of meeting that deadline of 1st July? Because a number of concerns with respect to the compliance burdens, as you pointed out, the fine print is yet to come out. Concerns on that front. Do you think India Inc. Essentially is ready and geared for GST come July 1st?
No, one thing about India is that you defer it by one more year, we'll get ready. For 11 months, we'll do something else and come back in the 12th month and say, now let's hurry up and try and do something. And still some people will fall out of the net and say, we are not yet ready. But I think this is an area, given the potential transformative impact of one Indian market, I think one needs to see this in the context of how you build an aircraft while flying it. You do it, there will be some teething troubles, no doubt. I think that we should face and move on. I think with the amount of IT networking which is already put in place and a fair amount of dialogue which occurred after council at various points of time, I think it's a huge task that was done to bring everybody onto this common page. I think in the name of saying that something is not ready and pushing it or deferring it, I think we would have walked in 2 steps backward to one step that is taken forward. I think I would go ahead and face the teething troubles and then adjust and then move on with something.
So you don't mind the slight bit of shock therapy coming in?
I won't call it a shock therapy. I mean, teething trouble will always be there. You're not yet gone to dentist to pull off your tooth. But I think a little bit of teething trouble will be there.
Fair enough, sir. That, of course, is the buzzword GST. But looking at the portfolio that you manage, looking at the division that you're managing, just a sense question, sir, as far as the monsoons are concerned, we're still a country where largely the lands are rainfall dependent. Just your sense, sir, the data initially, the sense coming in from the Met Department is that a normal monsoon is what we're anticipating. Just your sense, sir, about the impact that you foresee in the coming quarters by virtue of the Met Department's predictions.
Yeah, I think going by the recent record of the forecasts, I think one can be optimistic with this forecast as well. We've already seen the impact of El Nino is significantly weaker, and consequently, I think much of this forecast we can rely on. Having said that, I mean, like every other monsoon, one has to be vigilant in terms of what is the spatial distribution of rain. as well as temporal distribution, because we have seen in the past, India really got divided into microclimatic regions. It rains here and neighboring district, hardly any rain, and sometimes it does rain too much in pockets and doesn't rain for a long periods of time. I think those kinds of aspects, although the general forecast, as much as one can do at this time, for those also is average and fair and normal, and that's the kind of thing we hear from multiple forecasters. And one would look forward to this monsoon with optimism.
Fair enough, sir. One final question, sir, with respect to the macros. This one pertaining to the contentious issue of demonetization. We saw a hit coming in the fourth quarter. That is what many economists had predicted, that the effect will be slightly delayed. There will be a slight lag when we see the hit coming in, actually, with we saw GDP falling to 6.1%. You're in direct connect with the rural market, which is, of course, the big growth driver as far as India is concerned. Just a sense, sir, given your close proximity to the rural market, has the rural market revived? Is there still more pain that you anticipate come future quarters?
No, I think, once again, demonetization is to be seen in a larger context of what all is happening in the economy. And when it comes to rural, one of the earliest concerns with respect to demonetization has been on Rabi sowing. There is no money to pay for the labor, there is not enough money to buy seed and so on. I think now that the Rabi crop is behind us, we are seeing a record harvest for Rabi. I think people have found their own means of jugaad, as we have seen among the earliest times, as to combining payments to multiple labor, combining payments over weeks together, and all of that kind of jugaad has been done by people, extended credits and so on. Yeah, there has been a temporary hit, and one has very clearly seen the revival. But with other measures in terms of that, what are going into trying to double the farm income, some of the projects that are gone from the government side, and the next monsoon also being optimistic, all of that are playing a role in the recovery path already very clearly.
So you're not anticipating much pain going forward?
Yeah, I think demonetization in some sense is now behind us. There'll be other factors which will have an impact, positive or negative, at this point of time.
But demonetization, you say, is behind us. That, of course, was Mr. C. SIVAKUMAR. We'll continue this conversation with him on the other side of this short break. Keep watching CNBC TV 18.